I opened the garage my dead husband left me. Everyone thought it was worthless. Inside were 3 cars worth more than my son's entire inheritance. But that discovery came later. First, I had to survive the worst birthday of my life. 68 years old, sleeping in an abandoned building, my son's voice still ringing in my ears. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom." The key wouldn't turn. My hand shook too hard. Tears made everything blur. When the lock finally gave, the door screamed open, rust and decades of silence. I swept my flashlight across the darkness and froze. This wasn't possible. 3 weeks earlier, I'd stood in my family attorney's office. My husband Robert had been dead for 21 days. My son Jonathan wore a $2,000 suit. I wore the same black dress from the funeral. Mr. Hoffman adjusted his glasses. The way he did it made my stomach drop. "Everything is legally binding," he said, precisely as Mr. Campbell instructed. That should have been my warning. The reading passed in a fog, but certain words cut through like knives. "To my son, Jonathan Campbell, I leave our penthouse residence in Los Angeles, my primary investment portfolio." Then, almost whispered, "To my beloved wife, Susan Campbell, I leave the property at 1420 Industrial Parkway." A pause. The garage and its contents. A garage? 42 years of marriage? And Robert left me a garage? Jonathan's face transformed instantly, grief to triumph in half a second. His hand squeezed my shoulder, too hard. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I was too shocked to speak. Why would Robert do this? Where was I supposed to live? The answer came that evening. Jonathan drove me back to the penthouse, what I still thought of as home. I barely stepped through the door before he set my suitcase down. "I think it's best if you found somewhere else to stay." I stared at him. "What?" "The penthouse is mine now. It's in the will." His voice had that rehearsed quality, business voice. "I'm having colleagues over tomorrow. Need to make changes." "But where am I supposed to go?" The question came out small, broken. Jonathan shrugged. "Stay with Aunt Helen, or there's always that garage Dad left you." He laughed. "Why he left you that dump is beyond me. What are you gonna do? Open a mechanic shop at your age?" Something inside me crumbled. "Jonathan," I whispered, "this is my home." "Not anymore," he cut me off. "It's mine. Dad made that perfectly clear." I reached for a chair to steady myself. "I need time. Surely you don't expect me to leave tonight." That's when he said it. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance? Dad knew that." The cruelty was so unexpected I couldn't even respond. I took my suitcase, my purse, the key Mr. Hoffman had given me, and walked out. Hours later, I found myself in the industrial district, staring at a dilapidated garage with a rusted padlock. My birthday, 68, homeless. The key finally turned. The door groaned open. My flashlight beam cut through decades of darkness and revealed something impossible. The space wasn't filled with junk. No abandoned tools, no oil-stained workbenches. 3 vehicles sat before me, each covered with custom-fitted cloth covers, arranged with surgical precision. But it was the gleaming object at the front that stopped my heart. The unmistakable silver grille of a vintage Aston Martin, polished like a mirror, catching my flashlight like a beacon. What was this? Why had Robert kept it secret for 42 years? I stepped forward, pulled the cover from the Aston Martin, a 1964 DB5, pristine silver birch, identical to the one Sean Connery drove in those Bond films Robert loved. The car gleamed as if it had just rolled off the factory floor. "Robert," I whispered, "what were you doing?" My husband had never mentioned collecting cars, not once in 42 years. I moved to the next vehicle, pulled the cover away. A 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Those distinctive doors, elegant lines unmistakable even to my untrained eye. Deep blue paintwork, immaculate. Chrome details catching light like scattered stars. The third cover concealed a Ferrari, a 1967 275 GTB4, according to a small plaque beside it. Deep red, like the Rhine Robert ordered on our anniversaries. Each car had a leather portfolio beside it, documentation, provenance papers, maintenance records, purchase agreements. I wasn't an expert, but even I knew these weren't just nice old cars. These were museum-quality treasures. Worth what? I couldn't even guess. That's when I saw the envelope, taped to the wall beside a light switch. My name in Robert's handwriting. I found the switch. LED fixtures flooded the space with light. This wasn't an ordinary garage. Climate control systems, custom flooring, security features, specialized storage along the walls. This was a sanctuary. I sank onto a leather bench, the envelope heavy in my hands. Broke the seal. My dearest Susan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've come to think of as my final gift to you. My vision blurred. First, I need to apologize. The secrecy wasn't meant to hurt you. It was meant to protect what I was building for your future. 6 years ago, I received my diagnosis. The doctors gave me 5 years at best. I beat their timeline by a year, but I knew our time together was limited. I paused, blinking back tears. Robert's heart failure had been devastating, but he'd always downplayed it, always insisted he had plenty of time. I'd had no idea he'd been planning for the end from the very beginning. I know you're wondering about the will, about why I would leave our home to Jonathan instead of you. Believe me, this decision caused me more sleepless nights than my health ever did. But over the past decade, I've watched our son change. The ambitious boy we raised has become something different, something harder, more calculating. The truth is, I feared what would happen if I left everything to both of you jointly, or even split equally. Jonathan would have found ways to control the assets, to manage your portion for your benefit, as he would say. I've seen how he speaks to you when he thinks I'm not listening, how he dismisses your opinions, your needs. A tear splashed onto the paper. I hadn't realized Robert had noticed those interactions. So I created this split inheritance with very deliberate intentions. Jonathan has received what he will see as the valuable portion, the penthouse, the visible investments, the status symbols. But what you're looking at now, my love, is the real wealth. These 3 cars alone are worth approximately $12 million. I looked up at the 3 silent machines. $12 million? That couldn't possibly be right. But the cars are just the beginning. In the safe behind the photograph of us in Venice, combination is our anniversary, you'll find documentation for several investment properties I've acquired over the past 6 years, all placed in a living trust that transferred to your name upon my death. You'll also find banking information for accounts that should provide you with comfortable income for the rest of your life. My hand shook so badly I had to set the letter down. There was a safe. I looked around, spotted the framed photo on the wall. Robert and me on the Rialto Bridge, laughing as a street musician serenaded us during our 35th anniversary trip. The open safe opened with a soft click. Inside, a thick portfolio, several USB drives, neatly labeled. The top document, Estate of Robert Campbell, complete asset inventory for Susan Campbell. I flipped it open, had to sit down immediately. Columns of numbers and property descriptions swam before my eyes. Apartment buildings in Seattle, commercial property in Chicago, a small vineyard in Northern California, stock portfolios, bonds, private equity investments. The total value at the bottom made my ears ring. I returned to Robert's letter with numb fingers. I know this is overwhelming, and I'm sorry for keeping all of this from you. At first, it was just a project to channel my anxiety about the future, but as the portfolio grew, I realized revealing it prematurely might put it at risk if Jonathan discovered the extent of these holdings. You're probably wondering why I didn't simply protect you through more conventional means. The truth is, I wanted to give Jonathan a chance to show his true character. Perhaps, faced with his inheritance and responsibility for you, he would rise to become the man we raised him to be. If he's proven himself worthy, if he's ensured your comfort and security, then perhaps you might choose to share some of this wealth with him. But if he has revealed a different nature, well then, this legacy is your protection against that reality, your independence, your freedom. I had to stop reading. A sob escaped me. Robert had known. He had anticipated exactly what would happen, had foreseen how Jonathan would react to gaining control of the penthouse. I've always believed that character reveals itself most clearly at moments of inheritance, both what we receive and what we believe we deserve. Jonathan is receiving a test as much as an inheritance, and you, my love, are receiving the means to live the remainder of your life exactly as you choose, beholden to no one. All my love, now and always, Robert. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely now. After 42 years of marriage, I thought I had known everything about my husband. Instead, I was only now discovering the true depth of his love and foresight. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hours ago, my son had thrown me out of what I thought was my home, calling me a useless old woman, believing he had received the valuable inheritance. How wrong he had been about everything. I spent that first night on a leather sofa in a small adjoining office. Morning revealed more details I'd missed. The garage wasn't neglected industrial space. It was a meticulously renovated facility, state-of-the-art security systems, climate control systems, custom lighting designed to showcase the vehicles. What looked dilapidated from outside was intentional camouflage, concealing the treasures within. The office contained a compact bathroom with shower, a mini refrigerator stocked with water and provisions, even a small closet with clothes in my size, tags still attached. My practical husband had anticipated I might need temporary shelter here. After breakfast of granola bars and bottled water, I called the number for Marcus Weatherby that Robert had included. Despite the early hour, he answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Campbell, I've been expecting your call." His British accent was unmistakable. "First, please accept my condolences. Robert was not just a client, but a friend." 2 hours later, a distinguished man in his 60s arrived, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Over coffee, Marcus helped me understand the scope of what Robert had created. "Your husband began acquiring these vehicles approximately 6 years ago. He was extraordinarily methodical. each purchase carefully researched for authenticity, provenance, and investment potential. But why cars? I asked. Robert never showed any particular interest in automobiles. Marcus smiled gently. He explained that to me once. He said cars were tangible, beautiful assets that brought joy simply by existing. Unlike stocks or bonds, they could be appreciated on multiple levels as art, as engineering marvels, as historical artifacts, and as financial investments. He wanted to leave you something you could see and touch, not just numbers on a statement. My throat tightened at this insight. The collection is currently worth approximately $12 million, but its value has been increasing steadily. These particular models are considered blue-chip investments in the collector car world. And what am I supposed to do with them? Whatever you wish, Mrs. Campbell. You could sell them individually or as a collection, maintain them as investments. You could even drive them, though that would affect their value somewhat. He paused. There's no rush to decide. Robert paid for secure storage and maintenance for the next 5 years. After Marcus left, I sat in the quiet garage. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd believed myself essentially homeless, cast out by my son, mysteriously disinherited by my husband. Now I was discovering I was a wealthy woman with options I'd never imagined. But I had nowhere to live except this peculiar garage. I spent the day going through the portfolio from the safe, gradually comprehending the extent of Robert's secret financial maneuvering. Beyond the cars, he had assembled an impressive collection of income-producing properties and investments, all carefully structured to transfer to me seamlessly upon his death. One document particularly caught my attention: the deed to a modest but lovely cottage in Carmel, a coastal town we had visited several times over the years and always loved. According to the paperwork, Robert had purchased it 4 years ago, fully furnished and ready for occupancy. I had a home, a real home, not just this garage, however valuable its contents. As evening approached, my phone rang. Jonathan's number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom, where are you?" His voice held irritation, not concern. "Aunt Helen said you haven't contacted her." "I'm fine, Jonathan. I found somewhere to stay." "Well, I need you to come pick up the rest of your things from the penthouse. Interior designers start work tomorrow. They need everything cleared out." No apology, no acknowledgement of his cruelty, just more demands. "I see, and when would be convenient for you?" "Tomorrow morning before 9. I have meetings all day." I thought about the documents spread before me, proof of Robert's careful planning and deep love. I thought about the son who could so casually discard his mother when she became inconvenient, and I made a decision. I'll be there. After hanging up, I called Marcus back, asked if he could recommend a good attorney specializing in estate matters. By the time night fell, I had appointments scheduled with both legal counsel and a financial advisor. I spent my second night in the garage office more comfortably than the first, my mind no longer reeling with shock, instead methodically planning my next steps. I thought of Robert, imagining him carefully orchestrating this elaborate protection for me, all while keeping it secret to shield it from Jonathan's potential interference. "You knew him better than I did," I whispered to Robert's memory. "Our own son." The realization was painful but clarifying. Robert's unusual will hadn't been a rejection of me. It had been an act of profound love and foresight. He'd sacrificed having me share in his secret project during his final years to ensure I would be truly independent after he was gone. Tomorrow I would face Jonathan one more time, collect whatever personal treasures remained in what had been our home, and then begin my new life, one that Robert had carefully crafted for me from the shadows. As I fell asleep, I found myself wondering what expression would cross Jonathan's face if he knew what was housed in the worthless garage he had mocked. But that revelation, if it ever came, would be on my terms and my timeline. For now, I had the advantage of being underestimated. A useless old woman with a secret fortune and a growing determination to honor Robert's final gift by using it wisely. The next morning, I arrived at the penthouse precisely at 8:45. I had taken care with my appearance, one of the new outfits from the garage closet, a simple but elegant pantsuit in navy, hair styled carefully. Small rebellions, perhaps, but they fortified me for the confrontation ahead. Jonathan opened the door with phone in hand, barely glanced up. The space already felt different, emptier, colder. Several of my decorative pieces were missing. Family photos that had lined the hallway were gone, leaving ghostly rectangular marks on the walls. Finally, he tucked his phone into his pocket. "I've boxed up most of your personal stuff. Designers will be here at 9:30. We need to be efficient." No greeting, no inquiry about where I'd spent the night after he'd thrown me out, just immediate focus on his own convenience. "Good morning to you too, Jonathan." My voice steadier than I expected. He shrugged, led me toward the master bedroom. Several cardboard boxes sat stacked on what had been my side of the bed. "No point waiting. The place needs a complete update to maximize its value." "Its value?" I echoed. "You're planning to sell it eventually." "It's oversized for one person, and the market's hot right now. I figure I'll renovate, enjoy it for a year or so, then flip it for a substantial profit." The casual dismissal of the home Robert and I had created together stung, but I merely nodded. "I see. And Robert's things?" Jonathan gestured vaguely toward more boxes in the corner. "I kept the Rolex and his cufflink collection. The rest is just clothes and old man stuff. You can take whatever you want. The rest goes to donation." Old man stuff. I approached the boxes. Inside, Robert's beloved books, his collection of vintage fountain pens, the sweater I'd given him last Christmas that still faintly carried his scent. Each item a piece of the man I'd loved, now designated as worthless by our son. I began sorting methodically, setting aside items precious to me. Jonathan paced impatiently, checking his watch every few minutes. "Can't you hurry this up? It's just stuff, Mom. You don't even have a place to store it all." I looked up at him, really seeing the man my son had become. Handsome like his father, but with none of Robert's warmth or compassion in his eyes. When had that happened? When had ambition and materialism hollowed him out so completely? "I have a place, and I'll take as much time as I need. These aren't just possessions, Jonathan. They're memories." He rolled his eyes. "Fine, I have calls to make. Just be finished by 9:30. He strode from the room without a backward glance. As I continued selecting items, I found myself moving through stages of grief, not just for Robert, but for the son I thought I'd raised. Had he always been this cold, this dismissive? Had I simply refused to see it, making excuses for increasingly callous behavior over the years? Robert had seen it clearly, though, clearly enough to create an elaborate plan to protect me from our own child. When I finished, I found Jonathan in what had been Robert's study, now half emptied of its contents. My husband's beautiful mahogany desk, the one he'd inherited from his father, was gone, replaced by some sleek glass and chrome monstrosity. "I'm finished." Jonathan glanced up from his laptop. "Great. Do you need help carrying things down? I can call the doorman." "That would be appreciated." I hesitated. I'd like to say a proper goodbye to the place. 15 years of memories deserves a few moments of reflection. Something flickered in his expression. Irritation, impatience, perhaps a fleeting touch of guilt. But he nodded. Sure, whatever. Just lock up when you leave. I need to meet the designers downstairs. He brushed past me without another word. I took my time walking through each room, saying silent farewells to the space where Robert and I had spent our later years together. In our bedroom, I opened the closet one last time, running my fingers along the few remaining items of Robert's clothing. At the back of the closet, I noticed something. Robert's old leather messenger bag, pushed into a corner as if hastily hidden. I pulled it out, unzipped it, found a sealed envelope inside with my name written on it, along with a note. If you find this, Susan, it's an extra copy of everything in the garage safe, just in case. My clever, thorough husband, creating backups to his backups. I tucked the envelope securely into my purse, an unexpected treasure from this final visit. When the doorman had helped load my selected possessions into my car, I took one last look at the building. I felt a strange mixture of loss and liberation. The penthouse had been our home, filled with memories both beautiful and painful, but it had never truly been mine in the way Robert had intended the garage and its contents to be. I drove directly to the law offices of Patricia Winters, the attorney Marcus had recommended. She was a striking woman in her 50s, keen eyes, an air of formidable competence that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Campbell, she shook my hand firmly. I've reviewed the documents you forwarded. Your husband created quite an extraordinary estate plan. Yes, I settled into the chair across from her desk. I'm still trying to comprehend it all. From what I can see, everything is in impeccable order. The trust structures are sound, the transfers clean. He clearly worked with excellent counsel. She leaned forward slightly. What I'd like to understand is what you hope to achieve now. I considered her question carefully. I need to secure my future, find a permanent place to live, understand my financial position completely. I paused, and I need to determine how to handle my relationship with my son going forward. Patricia nodded. From what you've shared about recent events, that last point may be the most complicated. Have you decided whether to tell him about the extent of your inheritance? Not yet. Part of me wants him to continue believing I have nothing but a worthless garage. Let him live with the consequences of his actions and attitudes. I'm not sure that's the right approach either. There's no rush to decide. For now, let's focus on getting you settled and secure. I suggest you visit the Carmel property as soon as possible. If it meets your needs, you can begin transitioning there immediately. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, I had a clear action plan. Visit the cottage in Carmel, meet with the financial team managing Robert's secret investments, take my time making decisions about the cars and other assets. As I left Patricia's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Designers love the space, going with a complete gut renovation. Dropped your old photo albums to Helen's place since you didn't take them. No inquiry about whether I wanted those family photos, no concern about where I was staying or how I was managing, just casual disposal of more memories he deemed worthless. I didn't respond. Instead, I called to book a hotel in Carmel for that night. It was time to see the home Robert had prepared for me, the real inheritance he had intended all along. As I drove away from the city toward the coastal highway, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't merely reacting to loss and shock. I was moving purposefully towards something new. Whatever lay ahead in Carmel, whatever decisions awaited regarding Jonathan and the fortune Robert had secretly built, I would face them on my own terms. The useless old woman my son had dismissed was finding her strength, 1 mile at a time. The coastal drive to Carmel soothed something in my soul that had been raw since Robert's death. Highway 1 wound along the cliffs, offering glimpses of the Pacific's vast blue expanse. I breathed more deeply than I had in weeks. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over everything, as if nature itself were welcoming me to this new chapter. I followed the GPS through Carmel's charming downtown, fairy tale cottages and upscale boutiques, then down tree-lined streets increasingly residential in character. When the navigation announced arriving at destination, I pulled up before a modest stone cottage, partially hidden behind mature cypress trees. The property wasn't large or ostentatious, but it radiated charm and privacy. A natural wood gate led to a flagstone path winding through a small but beautifully maintained garden. With the key from the document packet, I unlocked the Dutch door and stepped inside. The interior stopped me in my tracks. Every detail seemed chosen specifically with me in mind. The living room featured built-in bookshelves surrounding a stone fireplace, comfortable seating in the colors and styles I'd always preferred. Natural light poured through multi-paned windows, illuminating hardwood floors covered with hand-woven rugs in subtle patterns. I moved through the space in wonder. The kitchen was updated but traditional, a small breakfast nook overlooking the garden. The single bedroom was cozy rather than large, but it opened onto a private patio with a glimpse of the ocean between neighboring properties. But it was the small study off the living room that finally broke through my composure. There, above a simple writing desk, hung a painting I recognized instantly. A watercolor of the Venice Canal where Robert had proposed, created by a street artist all those decades ago. We'd lost the original in a move years before, but here was a perfect replica, as if Robert had commissioned it from my memory. The tears came then, not the desperate sobs of recent weeks, but a gentler release. Robert had created this space for me with such care, such attention to the things that would bring me comfort and joy. Even in death, he was caring for me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I sank into a window seat, cushioned in my favorite shade of blue, watching the last light of day filter through the trees. For the first time since receiving news of the will, I felt truly at home. A soft knock at the door roused me from contemplation. Opening it, I found an elegant woman in her 70s standing on my doorstep, a covered dish in her hands. "Hello, you must be Susan. I'm Margaret Winters, your neighbor 2 doors down. Robert asked me to keep an eye out for when you arrived." I blinked in surprise. "You knew Robert?" She nodded, offered the dish. "He visited several times over the past few years preparing the cottage. I'm one of the few people who knew about his project. He made me promise not to reach out till you came to claim the place." Her eyes crinkled kindly. "It's just a simple casserole. I thought you might not want to worry about cooking your first night here." I accepted the dish, oddly touched by this continuation of Robert's care. "Thank you. Would you like to come in?" Over tea in the kitchen, Margaret shared details that filled more gaps in my understanding. Robert was so meticulous about getting everything right. He'd bring photos of your home in the city, trying to capture your aesthetic while creating something that belonged here in Carmel. I had no idea he was doing any of this, I admitted. He kept it completely secret. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "He mentioned that, said it was for your protection, though he didn't elaborate." She studied me with gentle directness. "He did say that when you finally came, you might need a friend, someone who understood what it was to rebuild a life after loss." "You've lost someone too?" "My husband, 8 years ago." She smiled softly. "It gets different, if not easier. Having good neighbors helps." By the time Margaret left, promising to introduce me to others in the community when I felt ready, I had a deeper appreciation for Robert's thoroughness. He hadn't just provided me with financial security and a physical home. He'd thought about my emotional and social needs as well. That night, I slept in the cottage's comfortable bedroom, lulled by the distant sound of waves and the gentle tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway that reminded me of the one in my childhood home. For the first time since Robert's passing, my sleep was deep and untroubled. The next morning, I explored the cottage more thoroughly in daylight. In the study desk, I found a folder containing all the practical information I might need: names of local doctors, service providers, community resources, even a membership to the local library already paid in my name. I also discovered a handwritten note tucked into the desk, dated just 3 months before Robert died. My dearest Susan, if you're reading this, you found your way to Carmel, and the home I hope brings you peace and joy. I wish more than anything that I could be sharing this next chapter with you, watching the sunset from the garden, walking the beach in the early morning fog. I know this transition can't be easy. You're facing enormous changes, some by choice and some by circumstance beyond your control. But I've always admired your resilience, even when you doubted it yourself. The cottage is yours to use however you wish, as a permanent home, a getaway, or even to sell if it doesn't suit you. My only hope is that it offers you a fresh start, free of obligations or expectations that don't serve your happiness. I love you always, Robert. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling simultaneously bereaved and profoundly loved. Even now, Robert was giving me permission to chart my own course, to make decisions based on my own needs rather than obligations to his memory. Over the next 3 days, I settled into a gentle rhythm of exploration, walking the beach in the mornings, getting to know the town's shops and cafes, meeting a few neighbors Margaret introduced me to. Each evening, I returned to the cottage that increasingly felt like mine, not just a place Robert had prepared. On the fourth day, as I was enjoying morning coffee in the garden, my phone rang. Jonathan. I hesitated before answering, conscious of how our last interaction had affected me. Hello, Jonathan. Mom, where are you? His voice held that familiar note of impatience. Aunt Helen said you haven't been staying with her. You're not answering at your friend Ruth's place either. I took a slow sip of coffee before responding. I'm taking some time for myself, Jonathan. I found a place to stay. What does that mean? What place? You can't just disappear like this. I'm not discussing my whereabouts right now. Was there something specific you needed? A pause. Then his voice shifted to what I recognized as his business negotiation tone. Actually, yes. I've been going through Dad's papers more thoroughly. I found some references to additional investments that weren't covered in the will reading. I think there might be accounts or properties we don't know about yet. My heart beat faster, but I kept my voice steady. Oh, what kind of references? Nothing specific, just notes about meetings with financial advisors I don't recognize, some cryptic comments about securing future assets. I thought you might know something about it. Your father handled most of our finances, which was true enough. If there are additional assets, I'm sure Mr. Hoffman would have mentioned them. Maybe, Jonathan sounded unconvinced. Listen, when are you coming back to the city? We should discuss this in person. I've got the penthouse torn apart for renovations, but we could meet somewhere. I'm not sure when I'll be back. I need this time away. His frustration was palpable even through the phone. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just wander off without telling anyone where you are. What if there's an emergency? What if something happens to you? I'm perfectly fine, Jonathan. I'm not wandering, and I'm not alone. I'm simply taking space to process everything that's happened. This isn't like you, accusation crept into his tone. First, Dad leaves you practically nothing in the will, then you disappear without a word. People will talk. I almost laughed at the irony. Let them talk, Jonathan. I'm beyond caring about appearances at this point. After ending the call with vague assurances that I'd be in touch when I was ready, I sat in the garden considering this new development. Jonathan was getting suspicious, looking for assets he believed were rightfully his. How long before he discovered the garage and its contents? Before he learned about the cottage? Before he realized the extent of what Robert had kept from him? 2 weeks after settling into the Carmel cottage, I'd established a comfortable routine. Mornings began with coffee in the garden or walks along the beach when the fog shrouded the coast. Afternoons were dedicated to practical matters, meeting with financial advisors, learning about the properties Robert had acquired, understanding my new circumstances. I'd begun to appreciate the extent of Robert's planning. The cottage was just the most personal aspect of a comprehensive strategy to ensure my independence. The income properties generated substantial monthly revenue, while the investment portfolios were conservatively managed for long-term stability. "Your husband was unusually thorough," remarked Howard Lent, the financial advisor who had worked secretly with Robert. "Most clients focus primarily on asset accumulation. Robert was equally concerned with creating systems for management that wouldn't burden you with daily decisions unless you wanted that involvement." I was in Howard's office in Monterey reviewing quarterly statements for the various trusts Robert had established. He knew I didn't have his head for financial intricacies. Howard smiled. "He mentioned that, but he also said you had excellent judgment about people and an intuitive understanding of value that he respected enormously." This glimpse of how Robert had spoken about me to others was unexpectedly moving. Even as he'd kept his plans secret, he'd maintained his faith in my capabilities. "There is one matter we should discuss." Howard's tone shifted slightly. "We've received inquiries from a Jonathan Campbell claiming to be conducting a review of his late father's financial affairs." My hands tensed around my teacup. My son, what exactly did he want to know? He was fishing for information about additional accounts or investments beyond what was disclosed in the will. I followed protocol and explained that client confidentiality prevents me from discussing any accounts without proper authorization. "Thank you," relief evident in my voice. Jonathan received his inheritance as specified in the will. Robert's intentions regarding the rest were quite clear. Howard nodded. "We'll continue maintaining that position, but you should be aware he's been persistent, contacting several firms associated with your husband's investments." This wasn't surprising. Jonathan had always been tenacious when pursuing something he wanted, a quality that served him well in business, but manifested as entitlement in personal matters. I appreciate the warning. I'm still determining how to handle the situation with my son. Driving back to Carmel, I contemplated the growing evidence of Jonathan's investigation. His suspicions, initially vague, were clearly solidifying into active pursuit. How long before he discovered the garage and its contents? Before he learned about the cottage? Before he realized the extent of what Robert had kept from him? And perhaps more importantly, what would I do when that happened? I was still pondering these questions when I arrived at the cottage to find an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked outside. My heart sank as I recognized the personalized license plate. J. Campbell. Jonathan stood on my doorstep, arms crossed, expression a mixture of triumph and accusation. "Found you. Interesting place you've got here, Mom. When were you planning to mention it?" I kept my voice calm despite my racing pulse. "Hello, Jonathan. This is a surprise." "I bet it is." He glanced pointedly at the cottage. Care to explain how you're suddenly a property owner in one of California's most expensive coastal towns? I unlocked the door, gestured him inside. No point creating a scene for the neighbors. I think you'd better come in. Jonathan followed, his critical gaze taking in every detail of the cottage interior. I could almost see him calculating its value, measuring its worth against his expectations. Charming, the word somehow rendered insulting by his tone. So this is why you've been dodging my calls. You've been hiding out in a secret vacation home. I haven't been hiding, Jonathan. I've been processing enormous changes and deciding how to move forward. I set my purse down, faced him directly. How did you find this place? He smiled without warmth. I'm not completely incompetent, Mom. When you disappeared, I hired a private investigator to locate you. Basic welfare check on an elderly parent who vanished after showing signs of confusion following her husband's death. The calculated manipulation of his approach struck like a physical blow, casting me as potentially senile to justify invasive investigation. I see. And this investigator tracked me here? After some effort, yes. The property records were interesting reading. Apparently, Dad purchased this place 4 years ago, but kept it out of his regular accounts. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, which made me wonder what else he might have hidden. I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle for tea. A small action to buy myself time. Robert made his decisions about the will for his own reasons. The cottage was meant to be a surprise. Jonathan followed, leaning against the doorframe. A surprise, he repeated flatly, like that worthless garage in the industrial district, another one of Dad's surprises. My hand stilled on the kettle. He knew about the garage. The question was, how much did he know about what it contained? The garage was part of his estate. Yes, the mysterious garage that no one could explain. Jonathan's voice hardened. I visited it yesterday, Mom. Door was locked, but the windows, while dirty, still allowed a peek inside when the light was right. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart hammered painfully. And I saw enough to know there are cars in there, vintage cars from what little I could make out. His jaw tightened. Cars worth significantly more than that penthouse Dad left me, the penthouse that comes with maintenance fees I can barely afford since most of the liquid assets went into trust funds I can't access. So there it was. Jonathan had discovered part of the truth, but not its full extent. He'd seen the cars, but likely didn't realize their true value or know about the additional properties and investments. Your father made his choices, Jonathan. The penthouse and investment portfolio he left you are substantial gifts. Gifts, he scoffed. The penthouse needs hundreds of thousands in repairs that I discovered only after starting renovations. The investment portfolio barely covers my existing commitments. Meanwhile, you're living in a Carmel cottage and apparently own a collection of classic cars worth God knows how much. I poured boiling water into the teapot, the familiar ritual steadying my nerves. What exactly do you want from me, Jonathan? The truth would be a start. Did you know about these secret assets all along? Were you and Dad planning this manipulation of the inheritance? No. I met his gaze firmly. I knew nothing about the cottage or the garage until after Robert died. I was as surprised as you are now. This admission seemed to catch him off guard. Then why keep it from me these past weeks? Why disappear instead of explaining? Because I needed time to understand it myself, and because your behavior after the will reading didn't exactly invite confidence or collaboration. He flinched slightly, then recovered. I was upset, finding out Dad had essentially disinherited me in favor of you. Disinherited you? Disbelief colored my voice. He left you a multi-million-dollar penthouse and investment accounts worth millions more. A fraction of what apparently he had hidden away. Jonathan's voice rose. Those cars alone are worth what? What, Jonathan? I challenged. How would you know their value unless you've been investigating far more thoroughly than you're admitting? He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. I have contacts in the collector car world, made some discreet inquiries based on what little I could see. Of course you did. I was suddenly weary of the deception and counter-deception. Would you like some tea? If we're going to have this conversation, we might as well be civilized about it. This mundane offer seemed to deflate some of his righteous anger. He nodded, taking a seat at the breakfast nook while I prepared 2 cups. As we sat facing each other across the small table, I saw something beneath Jonathan's indignation that I hadn't noticed before. A vulnerability, perhaps even fear. For all his bluster about being cheated out of his rightful inheritance, was there something more fundamental driving his pursuit? Jonathan, my tone gentler, why does this matter so much to you? You have a successful career, a beautiful home, financial security most people never achieve. What difference does it make if Robert left additional assets to me? He stared into his teacup, avoiding my gaze. It's not about the money, really. Then what is it about? When he finally looked up, I glimpsed the child he had once been, uncertain, seeking approval. It's about what it means. Dad trusted you with these assets, these secrets. He didn't trust me. And there it was, the core wound beneath the entitlement and anger. Not greed, but rejection. In his mind, Robert's careful planning represented not protection for me, but lack of faith in him. Oh, Jonathan, it wasn't about trust or lack thereof. Your father was trying to create security for both of us in different ways. By hiding millions in assets from me? His bitterness returned. By leaving you secretly wealthy while making it seem like he'd left you nothing but a worthless garage? I took a careful sip of tea, considering how much to reveal. The moment had come sooner than I'd expected, forcing a decision I wasn't fully prepared to make. How much of Robert's reasoning should I share? How much of the truth could Jonathan bear to hear? The late afternoon light slanted through the cottage windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where Jonathan and I sat in uneasy silence. I studied my son's face, the familiar features that echoed Robert's, yet somehow lacked the compassion that had always softened my husband's expression. There's a letter from your father. It explains his decisions more clearly than I could. Jonathan's posture stiffened. A letter? You've had a letter explaining all this and didn't think to share it? It was addressed to me, Jonathan, and given how you treated me after the will reading, I wasn't exactly eager to share something so personal. I met his gaze steadily. You called me a useless old woman and threw me out of my home. His eyes flickered away, a hint of discomfort crossing his face. I was upset. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. Do they? I asked quietly. Or do moments of high emotion simply reveal what's normally kept hidden? Rather than answering, Jonathan gestured impatiently. This letter, do you have it here? I rose, went to the study, retrieved both Robert's original letter from the garage and the copy I'd found in his messenger bag. Returning to the kitchen, I hesitated before handing him the copy. Before you read this, I want you to understand something. Your father loved you, Jonathan. Nothing in his actions was meant to hurt you, only to protect what he valued. Let me be the judge of that. He took the letter with barely concealed eagerness. I watched as he read, his expression shifting from anticipation to disbelief to something darker. His hands tightened on the paper, knuckles whitening as he reached the paragraphs addressing Robert's concerns about his character. When he finished, he set the letter down with deliberate care, as if afraid his control might shatter if he moved too quickly. So, his voice dangerously quiet, Dad thought I was what? Too materialistic? Too selfish to be trusted with the family wealth? He was concerned about how your values had changed over time, I corrected gently, and about how you might handle having authority over my financial well-being, And his solution was to deceive me, to create this elaborate scheme making me think I got the valuable inheritance while secretly leaving everything of real worth to you. His voice rose with each question, indignation building. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Jonathan, I started. No, he cut me off, standing so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. You don't get to Jonathan me in that patronizing tone, not after this. Dad manipulated me, tested me like some lab rat to see if I'd pass his twisted moral examination. I remained seated, refusing to match his emotional escalation. Your father made the best decisions he could based on what he observed over years, not days or weeks. If his assessment seems harsh, perhaps that deserves reflection rather than rejection. He paced the small kitchen, tension radiating from every movement. Reflection? You want me to reflect on being portrayed as some kind of heartless monster in my own father's eyes? That's not what the letter says. It expresses concern about certain tendencies, not a fixed judgment of your entire character. Jonathan stopped pacing to stare at me incredulously. Are you seriously defending this? He left you a fortune while setting me up to reveal my true nature, and apparently I failed his test spectacularly by expecting to actually receive what the will specified. There was no point arguing about his characterization. In a sense, he wasn't wrong. Robert had indeed created a situation designed to reveal character through action, and Jonathan's actions after the will reading had confirmed rather than disproved his father's concerns. The question now is where we go from here. He laughed without humor. Where we go? That's simple. As Robert Campbell's son and heir, I have every right to contest this arrangement. Hidden assets, secret trusts, it all smacks of deliberate attempt to circumvent normal inheritance. I had anticipated this reaction. The legal structures your father created are impeccable, Jonathan. The assets were his to distribute as he saw fit, and he did so through proper channels, documented and legitimate. Contesting would be expensive, lengthy, and almost certainly futile. You sound awfully confident for someone who claimed to know nothing about finances. I've had several weeks to consult with excellent advisors, the same ones who helped your father create these arrangements. Jonathan braced his hands against the counter, his back to me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. When he finally turned, his expression had shifted from anger to calculation, a look I recognized from negotiations I'd witnessed over the years. What if we reached a compromise, his tone deliberately reasonable, a more equitable distribution that honors Dad's wishes while acknowledging my position as his son? Surely half of these assets. No, I interrupted, surprising us both with my firmness. I'm not negotiating Robert's final wishes. The assets he left me aren't just about money, Jonathan. They represent his care, his foresight, his desire to ensure I would never be dependent on anyone's goodwill, including yours. So that's it. His voice hardened again. You keep everything, justified by Dad's paranoid suspicions about me? I stood then, meeting him at eye level. What I choose to do with these assets going forward will depend on many factors, but your sense of entitlement to them isn't helping your case. My case, he scoffed, so I'm on trial now too? In a way, yes. I decided complete honesty was necessary. Your father's letter gave me discretion about sharing these assets with you if you demonstrated certain qualities. Your behavior since his death, particularly toward me, will influence those decisions. The blunt assessment landed like a physical blow. Jonathan stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. The compliant, accommodating mother he'd taken for granted had been replaced by someone with clear boundaries and expectations. You can't be serious. You're actually going to hold Dad's fortune hostage based on whether I pass some subjective character assessment? I'm going to honor the spirit of your father's wishes, which included protecting these assets from being squandered or misused. He grabbed his car keys from the table. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Jonathan, I called as he headed for the door. Before you rush off to consult attorneys, consider something. What if your father was right? What if this inheritance, the visible, prestigious part, was exactly what you needed to recognize certain truths about yourself? He paused at the threshold, not turning. Save the philosophical lessons, Mom. I've had enough Campbell family wisdom for one day. After the door slammed behind him, I sank back into my chair, emotional exhaustion washing over me. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd feared. Jonathan focusing entirely on what he perceived as rightfully his, showing no real concern for my welfare or acknowledgement of his previous behavior. Yet beneath his indignation, I'd glimpsed something else. The hurt of a son who felt his father had judged him and found him wanting. That pain was real, even if his response to it was problematic. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, carried it to the garden, seeking comfort in the coastal breeze and late afternoon sunlight. Robert's letter had predicted this moment, had prepared me for Jonathan's reaction. What it hadn't prepared me for was the weight of becoming the arbiter of his character, of holding the power that Robert had entrusted to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Saw your son leave in quite a hurry. Everything okay? I'm making lasagna if you'd like company tonight. The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Company would be wonderful. It's been a difficult afternoon. As I watched the sun begin its descent toward the Pacific, I contemplated the path ahead. Jonathan would almost certainly consult attorneys, though any legal challenge would ultimately prove futile. The real question was whether this confrontation would drive him further into entitlement and resentment, or, as Robert had hoped, it might eventually prompt genuine reflection and growth. Either way, I had decisions to make. About the cars, about the properties, about how much to share with Jonathan and under what conditions. Robert had given me not just wealth, but responsibility, a final act of faith in my judgment that both honored and burdened me. For now, though, I would have dinner with my new friend. I would continue establishing my life here in this peaceful cottage, and I would give Jonathan the space to process his anger and disappointment, hoping that somewhere beneath the entitled man he'd become, the thoughtful boy we'd raised might still exist, waiting to emerge. 3 months after Jonathan's angry departure from the cottage, autumn arrived in Carmel. Subtle shifts, slightly cooler mornings, changing light that painted the coastline in softer hues, fewer tourists crowding the village streets. I had settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural, dividing my time between maintaining the cottage, exploring my new community, and managing the responsibilities that came with Robert's unexpected legacy. With Patricia Winter's guidance, I'd established a comfortable system for overseeing the various properties and investments. The cars remained in their secure garage, maintained by Marcus Weatherby's team through monthly visits. I'd even driven the Aston Martin once, a tentative journey along the coastal highway that had left me exhilarated and oddly closer to Robert, as if sharing something he had loved. Jonathan and I maintained a strained distance, communicating primarily through formal emails about practical matters. As Patricia had predicted, his initial legal inquiries about contesting the inheritance had fizzled once attorneys confirmed the solidity of Robert's arrangements. His most recent message, 2 weeks earlier, had been coldly professional, requesting certain family photographs and documents with no personal inquiries about my welfare. I was pruning roses in the front garden when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the cottage. A woman emerged, tall, professionally dressed with a brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises. She approached with a business card already extended. Mrs. Campbell, I'm Diane Reeves, Jonathan's assistant. May I speak with you briefly? Something in her manner, tense, urgent beneath the professional veneer, sent a ripple of concern through me. Of course. Is everything all right? She glanced around as if assessing privacy. Perhaps we could speak inside. In the cottage living room, Diane perched on the edge of the sofa, declining my offer of tea. Mrs. Campbell, I'm here because Jonathan has experienced some significant setbacks. He asked me to speak to you directly as he felt you might not take his call. What kind of setbacks? Though a sinking feeling suggested I already knew. Financial ones, primarily. She opened a slim portfolio she'd been carrying. The renovation costs on the penthouse exceeded estimates by nearly double. There were structural issues that couldn't have been anticipated, requiring substantial additional investment. I see. I kept my expression neutral, though part of me had been anticipating something like this. Jonathan had always pursued aggressive investment strategies, preferring dramatic gains over steady growth. And how does this concern me? Diane shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan is facing potential foreclosure on the penthouse. The renovation loans use the property as collateral, and with the investment failure, he cannot meet the payment schedule. That's unfortunate, but I'm still not clear on why he sent you to me with this information. She met my gaze directly. Mrs. Campbell, to be blunt, Jonathan needs financial assistance. He's aware that you have resources that could help him avoid bankruptcy and losing the penthouse. There it was, the request I'd been expecting since the confrontation 3 months ago. Not an apology, not a reconciliation attempt, but a financial appeal delivered through an intermediary to avoid the humiliation of asking directly. Has Jonathan considered selling the penthouse? Even partially renovated, it would likely cover his debts. He's explored that option. Unfortunately, in its current state, mid-renovation, the property would sell at a significant loss. Additionally, there are complications with some of the contractors that make a quick sale problematic. Translation: Jonathan had likely alienated the construction team through demanding behavior or payment issues, creating additional obstacles. I appreciate you coming to explain the situation. Please tell Jonathan I've heard his request and will consider it. Diane looked startled by the non-committal response. Mrs. Campbell, the situation is quite urgent. The foreclosure proceedings could begin within weeks. I understand, and I'll need time to consider my response. That's all I can offer today. After showing the clearly dissatisfied assistant out, I sat in my garden, thinking about Jonathan's predicament. Robert's letter seemed almost prophetic now. He had anticipated that Jonathan's financial decisions might eventually lead to crisis, creating the very scenario we now faced. The next morning, rather than calling Jonathan immediately, I drove to the city to see the penthouse situation for myself. The building's doorman, recognizing me from my years living there, allowed me up without calling ahead. What I found was sobering. The once elegant home had been gutted to the studs in most areas, exposed wiring and plumbing creating a hazardous maze. Construction equipment sat abandoned, a fine layer of dust suggesting weeks had passed since any work had been done. Expensive marble and custom fixtures were stacked haphazardly, some already damaged from improper storage. As I carefully picked my way through what had been our home, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for the destruction of spaces that held so many memories, frustration at the obvious waste and mismanagement, and an unexpected sense of gratitude for Robert's foresight in protecting me from depending on Jonathan's financial judgment. I was examining water damage extending from the master bathroom into adjoining rooms when I heard the front door open. "Mom," Jonathan's voice carried through the gutted space. "The doorman said you were here." He appeared in the doorway, and I was struck by how different he looked from our last encounter. His normally immaculate appearance had slipped. His clothes were still expensive but slightly rumpled, his face showing the strain of sleepless nights. He'd lost weight, the sharpened angles of his face emphasizing how much he resembled Robert in his more difficult moments. I wanted to see it for myself. I gestured to the demolition surrounding us. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from his childhood. I assume Diane spoke with you yesterday? She did. She explained your financial situation. And the single word carried a weight of expectation. And I needed to understand the full picture before making any decisions. I stepped carefully around a pile of discarded fixtures. This is quite different from what you described when you started the renovations. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Yes, well, things rarely go as planned in construction or in life. Jonathan, my tone gentle, what happened with the investment project Diane mentioned? Something in my tone must have broken through his defensive posture. He sank down on an overturned bucket, suddenly looking exhausted. I overextended. The development opportunity seemed guaranteed, luxury condos in an up-and-coming area, pre-construction sales already strong. I committed not just available capital, but borrowed against other assets, including the anticipated increased value of the penthouse after renovations. And then environmental review found contamination issues that weren't disclosed in the initial site assessment. Remediation costs made the project non-viable. Investors pulled out. He gestured vaguely. The domino effect was comprehensive. I looked around at the destruction surrounding us, both the physical demolition and the wreckage of Jonathan's financial stability. Why didn't you reach out sooner, before things reached this point? His expression hardened. After our last conversation, after discovering Dad's manipulation and your role in it, pride, I suppose, or stubbornness, humble family traits. Both powerful motivators. I remembered similar moments of Robert digging in his heels against practical considerations when his pride was at stake. So, Jonathan said, after a moment, his attempt at casual inquiry undermined by the tension in his voice, have you made your decision about helping me? I met his gaze directly. I'm willing to help, Jonathan, but not unconditionally, and not by simply writing a check to cover your debts. Relief and wariness battled in his expression. What conditions? We'll need to discuss that properly, not here surrounded by the evidence of hasty decisions. Come to Carmel tomorrow. We'll talk about a path forward that addresses both your immediate crisis and the underlying patterns that created it. He looked like he wanted to argue, to push for immediate commitment, but necessity overcame impulse. Fine, tomorrow. As I left the building, the contrast between the ruined penthouse and my peaceful cottage in Carmel couldn't have been starker. Jonathan had received what appeared to be the valuable inheritance, the prestigious address, the visible wealth. I had received what seemed worthless, an abandoned garage, an unknown cottage. Yet here we are, our fortunes dramatically reversed through a combination of Robert's planning and Jonathan's choices. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and decisions. For tonight, I would return to Carmel, to the home Robert had so thoughtfully created, and consider how best to honor both his concerns and his hopes for our son. Jonathan arrived at the cottage precisely at 11 a.m. the next morning, his appearance markedly more polished than the previous day. A deliberate effort, I suspected, to project control he no longer possessed. I had spent the morning preparing, not just mentally, but physically, setting the stage for our conversation with intentional care. You have a lovely home, he commented stiffly as I led him through the cottage to the back patio. Your father chose well. He remembered how much I love the coast. Jonathan's expression tightened at the mention of Robert, but he said nothing as he took the offered seat. The patio overlooked a small but meticulously maintained garden that sloped gently downward, offering glimpses of the Pacific between neighboring properties. The setting was peaceful, private, neutral ground for the difficult conversation ahead. After pouring us both iced tea, I turned to face my son directly. Before we discuss your financial situation, I'd like to show you something. I handed him a leather portfolio I'd prepared that morning, containing selected documents from Robert's records. Jonathan opened it warily, as if expecting another unwelcome revelation. These are financial projections and maintenance assessments for the penthouse. Your father commissioned them 3 years ago, anticipating eventual major systems failures in the building. The estimates closely match what you've encountered in your renovations. Jonathan frowned. Dad never mentioned any of this. He tried, I corrected gently. Several times. You dismissed his concerns as excessive caution, unnecessary expense. He showed you these reports during your last Christmas visit, before his diagnosis. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. The boring building assessment he kept bringing up at dinner. The same. I took a sip of my tea. Robert wasn't just being cautious. He was trying to prepare you for exactly the situation you're facing now. Jonathan set the portfolio aside, his jaw tightening. If you've brought me here just to say I told you so on Dad's behalf, I haven't. I'm establishing context for my decision about helping you. Robert saw this coming, not just the building issues, but the pattern of choices that has led to your current crisis. And what pattern is that exactly? His tone was defensive, but I caught genuine confusion beneath it. Prioritizing appearance over substance, pursuing impressive gains over sustainable growth, dismissing caution as unnecessary pessimism. I met his gaze directly. The same qualities that led you to throw your mother out of her home rather than consider her needs alongside your plans. He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. I shouldn't have handled it that way. No, you shouldn't have. A silence fell between us, filled only by the distant sound of waves and the occasional call of seabirds. Jonathan fidgeted slightly, unused to this directness from me. Throughout his adult life, I had been the mediator, the smoother of rough edges, the one who accommodated his moods and absorbed his dismissals. So what are you proposing? What are these conditions for your help? First, complete transparency. I need to see everything. All accounts, debts, contracts, commitments, no hidden liabilities or convenient omissions. He nodded stiffly. Fine. What else? Professional financial management going forward. You've demonstrated that your judgment in these matters is compromised by impulsivity and overconfidence. Any funds I provide will be structured through trusts with appropriate oversight. His expression darkened. So I'll be on an allowance like a child? Like someone who has made serious financial miscalculations and needs guardrails while rebuilding. It's not punitive, Jonathan. It's protective of both the assets and yourself. And I suppose you'll be controlling these trusts? Bitterness edged his voice. No, I said, surprising him. Independent trustees with fiduciary responsibility. I'm not interested in controlling your life, only in ensuring that help I provide actually leads to sustainable improvement rather than temporary relief. He absorbed this, visibly struggling between his desperate need for assistance and his resistance to the implied loss of autonomy. What about the penthouse? It's still technically mine. The practical solution would be to sell it. I watched his reaction carefully. Even in its current state, it would cover a significant portion of your debts. You could start fresh, perhaps in a more manageable property. Sell it? The idea seemed to genuinely shock him. But it's our family home. It's where Dad and you. It's a physical space, Jonathan, one that you were eager to gut and transform just months ago. The memories don't reside in the walls. He stood abruptly, pacing the small patio. You don't understand. Selling would be admitting complete failure. Everyone would know. And there it was, the core of his resistance. Not emotional attachment to our family home, but concern about the public perception of selling it under financial duress. Appearance over substance, yet again. People already know. Construction halted months ago. Contractors have filed liens. The financial community discusses these matters. He stopped pacing, shoulders slumping lightly. I've really destroyed everything, haven't I? The naked vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time since Robert's death, I glimpsed my son beneath the defensive posturing, confused, overwhelmed, and finally facing the consequences of years of prioritizing appearances over reality. Not everything, my tone softening, but you've created a significant challenge that will require equally significant changes to address. Jonathan sank back into his chair, looking suddenly exhausted. So what exactly are you offering? A structured way forward. I'll establish a trust that will satisfy the most pressing creditors and prevent foreclosure. We'll bring in professionals to either complete the renovations appropriately or prepare the penthouse for sale, depending on what makes financial sense after proper assessment. And in return, you agree to financial oversight for a defined period. You work with a counselor on the underlying patterns that created this situation. I hesitated, then continued firmly. And you make amends for how you treated me after your father's death. His eyes snapped to mine. Amends? What does that mean exactly? It means acknowledging the harm done. It means understanding that relationships have consequences, just as financial decisions do. I leaned forward slightly. Jonathan, I'm not offering help purely as a financial transaction. I'm offering it as a mother who believes her son can be better than his recent behavior suggests. Something in my words seemed to penetrate the armor he'd maintained throughout our recent interactions. He looked away, blinking rapidly. I didn't mean what I said that day about you being useless. I was angry and lashing out. Perhaps, but those words didn't emerge from nowhere. They reflected an attitude toward me, toward older women generally, that you've harbored for some time. He didn't deny it, which represented its own small progress. I need time to think about all this. It's a lot to process. Take the time you need, but remember that your creditors' timelines won't adjust to your contemplation schedule. Some decisions have narrow windows of opportunity. As Jonathan left the cottage an hour later, neither of us had definitive answers about the path forward. I had outlined my offer and conditions. He had neither accepted nor rejected them outright, but something had shifted in our interaction, a tentative step toward honesty that had been absent in our relationship for years. That evening, sitting in the garden as twilight settled over Carmel, I found myself wondering what Robert would think of my approach. Had I been too harsh, too accommodating? There was no way to know, of course, but I felt a quiet confidence that I had found my own balance. Neither the enabling mother I had sometimes been, nor the purely transactional business person Jonathan might have expected. The path ahead remained uncertain. Jonathan might reject my conditions out of pride, or accept them with hidden resentment rather than genuine understanding. But for perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, I had spoken my truth clearly, without cushioning it to protect his feelings or preserve artificial harmony. Whatever came next would be built on that foundation of honesty, however uncomfortable it might be. And in that, I believed Robert would recognize the wisdom of his unconventional inheritance plan, not in the distribution of material assets, but in the opportunity it had created for both Jonathan and me to finally see ourselves and each other clearly. Spring returned to Carmel, painting the cottage garden with bursts of color that seemed impossibly vibrant against the blue backdrop of the Pacific. Nearly 9 months had passed since Robert's death, 6 since my discovery of the garage's contents, and 4 since Jonathan's financial crisis had forced a reckoning between us. Those 4 months had brought changes I couldn't have imagined during our tense conversation on the cottage patio. After 3 days of silence following my conditional offer, Jonathan called with a response that surprised me with its simplicity. I'll do it. All of it. Whatever it takes. The journey since that acceptance had never been simple nor smooth. The financial restructuring alone had required weeks of intensive work with accountants and attorneys, uncovering the full extent of Jonathan's financial entanglements, some significantly worse than he had initially disclosed. The penthouse required difficult decisions, ultimately resulting in a compromise, completing essential renovations to make it marketable, then selling it to cover the most pressing debts. More challenging than these practical matters was the emotional work Jonathan had committed to undertaking. Weekly sessions with a therapist specializing in family dynamics and financial psychology had initially been approached with skepticism, but gradually became a source of genuine insight. Our own relationship entered new territory as well. Territory neither of us navigated perfectly, but with increasing honesty on both sides. I was tending to the roses that framed my garden gate when a now familiar car pulled into the cottage driveway. Jonathan emerged carrying a small package, his appearance noticeably different from both his former polished executive persona and the desperate man who had faced financial ruin months earlier. His clothing was still quality, but less ostentatious, his demeanor more relaxed. He had even grown a short beard that softened the sharp angles of his face, making him look remarkably like Robert in his younger days. "The garden looks amazing," he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, a gesture that had once been perfunctory, but now carried genuine warmth. "You really transformed this place." "Just working with what your father started." I set aside my gardening tools. "Coffee on the patio?" As we settled into what had become our routine for these monthly visits, I noted the ease that had gradually replaced the tension of our earlier interactions. Jonathan still struggled sometimes with the financial constraints the trust imposed, still occasionally reverted to old patterns of judgment or dismissiveness, but the changes were undeniable. The penthouse closing is next week. Final walkthrough went well. We'll clear about 40% more than the initial distress sale estimates, thanks to the targeted renovations. That's excellent news. It will give the trust more flexibility for your next steps. About those next steps, Jonathan set down his cup carefully. I wanted to run something by you. I've been offered a position with a community development organization focusing on affordable housing projects. I raised my eyebrows, unable to hide my surprise. Jonathan's career had always been in high-end commercial real estate and luxury developments, with frequent dismissals of affordable housing as financially unattractive. It's obviously a significant pay cut from my previous positions, but the trust structure means basic living expenses are covered. He hesitated, searching for words. And it feels like meaningful work, using what I know about development for something beyond profit margins. That sounds like a significant shift in focus. What prompted it? Jonathan gazed out toward the ocean for a moment before answering. Remember that project that failed, the luxury condos? The site was eventually sold at bankruptcy auction to a nonprofit housing developer. They're building mixed-income housing there now, efficiently, thoughtfully designed, environmentally conscious. I've been consulting with them informally for a few months. He shrugged, a gesture somehow both self-conscious and proud. I'm good at it, the technical aspects of development without the pressure to maximize every dollar of profit. I studied my son's face, noting the genuine animation as he described the project. It sounds like you found something that engages more than just your business acumen. Dad would probably find it ironic, Jonathan acknowledged with a rueful smile, me ending up working in affordable housing development after years of chasing luxury markets. I think he'd be pleased. He always admired competence directed toward worthwhile goals. Jonathan nodded, then reached for the package he had brought. Speaking of Dad, that's partly why I brought this. The penthouse clearance uncovered some things I thought you should have. Inside the carefully wrapped package was a small wooden box I recognized immediately. Robert's collection of cufflinks and tie pins, items Jonathan had initially claimed for himself during our rushed clearing of personal effects. I kept these thinking they represented some connection to Dad, but I realized recently they were just things. The real connection to him isn't in possessions. Beneath the cufflinks lay something else, a small velvet pouch containing my original wedding band, which I had assumed lost during the penthouse chaos. I found it in Dad's study safe, along with this. He handed me a small envelope with my name written in Robert's handwriting. Inside was a card containing just a few lines. For our 45th anniversary coming soon, the first band was a promise of the life we would build. This one celebrates the life we created. All my love, always. Tucked into the card was a jeweler's receipt for a custom eternity band dated just weeks before Robert's final hospitalization, an anniversary gift he hadn't lived to give me. He was planning ahead even then, I said softly, tears blurring my vision, always thinking of future moments. The jeweler still had the order. I picked it up for you. He withdrew a small box from his pocket, handed it to me. Inside was a delicate band of sapphires and diamonds, simple, elegant, exactly my taste. The stones caught the spring sunlight, sending prisms dancing across the patio table. Oh, Robert. I slipped the band onto my finger alongside my original wedding ring. They complemented each other perfectly, the plain gold of beginnings, the gemstones of a journey completed. Jonathan watched quietly, allowing me this moment of connection with his father. When I finally looked up, I saw something in his expression I hadn't witnessed in years. A softness, a respect untainted by impatience or calculation. Thank you. This means more than I can express. We talked for another hour, discussing his potential new position, my ongoing projects restoring the cottage garden, the latest updates from the trustees managing the inherited assets. As he prepared to leave, Jonathan paused at the garden gate. I've been meaning to ask, whatever happened with those cars, the ones in the garage Dad left you? I smiled, recalling my most recent conversation with Marcus Weatherby. I'm keeping the Aston Martin. Robert would have loved knowing I occasionally drive it along the coast. The others will be sold, with proceeds divided between a foundation supporting financial education and a trust for your future children, should you have any. Future children, Jonathan repeated thoughtfully. That's optimistic. Your father was always an optimist at heart. Beneath his practical planning lay a fundamental belief that people can grow, can become better versions of themselves when given the right opportunities. As I watched Jonathan drive away, I reflected on the extraordinary journey the past year had encompassed. Robert's unconventional inheritance plan had initially seemed cruel in its apparent imbalance, yet it ultimately achieved precisely what he'd hoped: security and independence for me, and a catalyst for Jonathan to confront patterns that were diminishing his life. Not every wound was fully healed between my son and I, not every lesson had been perfectly learned, but we had begun a new chapter, based on honesty rather than convenience, on mutual respect rather than obligatory roles. That evening, I drove the Aston Martin along the coastal highway, the powerful engine purring beneath me as I navigated curves Robert had never seen me take. The setting sun transformed the ocean into molten gold, while my hands, adorned with both the plain band of beginnings and the jeweled circle of completion, guided the wheel with growing confidence. You were right, I said aloud to Robert's memory, my voice carried away by the rush of wind. About so many things. The worthless garage that had once represented my son's dismissal of my value had transformed not only my circumstances, but our relationship. The inheritance that seemed so cruelly imbalanced had proven to be Robert's final act of wisdom and love for both of us. As I turned the car toward home, my home, the cottage by the sea that Robert had prepared with such care, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. Whatever the future held, I would face it with the security of Robert's planning behind me, the lessons of this challenging year within me, and the hard-won wisdom of knowing my own worth guiding me forward. The garage key that had once opened only a physical door had ultimately unlocked something far more valuable, a new understanding of love, legacy, and the courage to begin again, no matter one's age or circumstances.